Globalization, Development, and Dependency. At the end of this presentation, we are expected to have answered the following questions. What is globalization? What is development? What is dependency? And what are the impacts of globalization, development, and dependency in education? What is globalization?
Globalization is a process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology.
Since the mid-1980s, there has been an explosion of interest in the idea of globalization. Throughout this period, there has also been an unprecedented rise in prominence and influence of a range of multilateral and supranational organizations, such as those tied into the system of global governance. There is now a thickening web of multilateral agreements, global and regional institutions, and regimes, as well as trans-governmental policy networks and summits that characterize the global economy and polity. Correspondingly, there have also been shifts in the nature of global production networks and the increasing penetration of multinational corporations and international financial institutions, or IFIs, across the planet. The period has also produced new social inequalities across the world, particularly as a result of economic globalization.
In these transformations, education is implicated. It is seen as having an important role to play in these processes, with investment in people, skills, and knowledge becoming essential for countries wishing to participate in the global economy.
What is the impact of globalization in education? Globalization is a process which has affected many areas of human life, one of those being education. In the 20th century, many developing countries have experienced growth in the educational facilities available to them due to the entry of institutions from the West. Some believe that this process is an invaluable opportunity for the people of the developing countries to raise their skills and standards of education. Others fear that it is merely a modern version of cultural imperialism that will lead to the creation of a universal, ultimately Western society. Through globalization of education, which is being knowledge transfer from the Western countries into developing countries, is intended to improve the skills and capabilities of the people receiving it. Under the effects of globalization, education is undergoing constant changes.
The effects of globalization on education bring rapid developments in technology, and communications are foreseeing changes within school systems across the world as ideas, values, and knowledge, changing the roles of students and teachers, and producing a shift in society from industrialization towards an information-based society. It reflects the effect on culture and brings about a new form of cultural imperialism.
The rise of a global society, driven by technology and communication developments, are shaping children, the future citizens of the world, into global citizens who are intelligent people with a broad range of skills and knowledge to apply to a competitive, information-based society. The future of countries often lies within their ability to compete in a global market where industrial-based economies are giving way to knowledge-based industries, realizing the importance of knowledge, skills, and the intellectual capacity to meet the challenges of accelerated change and uncertainty. Education is becoming a lifelong learning and training process, developing transferable skills and knowledge that can be applied to competitive markets where knowledge and information is being traded as a commodity. What is development? By contrast with globalization, the idea of development has an older history and can be traced back to the post-Second World War period. In his inaugural speech in 1947, President Truman set out a vision of the future for the world's low-income countries and coined the term development to refer to processes of economic and social progress in colonial and post-colonial states. In Truman's speech, three central themes should be noted. First, a distinction is made between the old colonial or imperial way of doing things and the new U.S. way. The phrase development also replaced that of European colonialism and imperialism. Secondly, development was viewed as a largely technical phenomenon, with the U.S. scientific advancement or knowledge being passed on and utilized for the benefit of poor people and countries. Thirdly, assistance was selective and bestowed upon peace-loving peoples to encourage them to turn their backs on the false philosophy of communism. Let's talk about modernization theory. Throughout the early post-war period, writing on development was underpinned by modernization theory. Most famously enunciated over a decade later in Rostow's The Stages of Economic Growth, a non-communist manifesto, modernization theory became the dominant explanation of how low-income countries could improve the living conditions of their populations by following a set of prescriptive policies to encourage economic takeoff. Rostow's theory embraced a very linear view of history, with the West, and particularly the U.S., at the helm. Other countries were encouraged to follow a set of stages that promised the possibility of catching up with the West. Within modernization theories, education was regarded as playing a central role. Inglis and Smith, for example, emphasized the role of education in creating modern individuals, while Harbison and Myers suggested that education is the key that unlocks the door to modernization. Education here is seen as fundamental in the development of the necessary technical and cultural skills needed for economic development, while a mass education system was seen as a key pillar of a developed society. What is dependency?
Dependency theory is a theory of how developing and developed nations interact. It can be seen as an opposition theory to the popular free market theory of interaction. Dependency theory was first formulated in 1950s, drawing on Marxian analysis of the global economy and as a direct challenge to the free market economic policies of the post-war era.
The development of the rich world was achieved by exploitation of the developing world. The diagram to the right very simply shows how resources are moving from the periphery, developing, to the core, developed. That developing countries moved into production of cash crops, like coffee, tea, or cocoa, which meant that they were no longer subsistent and actually dependent on developed countries for food imports and food aid. That the development of many countries was slowed or stopped by the arrival of colonists. This points out that many countries were richer before colonization than after. Dependency theories propose that colonialism and neocolonialism, that is, continuing economic dependence on and exploitation of former colonial countries, are the main causes of global poverty. Countries have developed at an uneven rate because wealthy countries have exploited poor countries in the past and continue to do so today through foreign debt and foreign trade. Now, what is the impact of dependency theory in education? An application of dependency theory to education would not take issue with the developmentalists' assertion that education promotes individual modernity, but refute the notion that a high aggregate level of individual modernity will promote national development. Educational modernization may promote a deepening of dependent ties as modernism is defined on the course terms. Dependency theory implicitly does not expect that reformed national education systems can be sufficient or even relatively important basis for national development given the structure of the capitalist world economy. Perhaps this is why education has received so little attention in the recent literature on dependency and underdevelopment. Education may well serve to consolidate dependency, but it cannot be a force for breaking out of dependency. To wrap up, let us watch this short clip about globalization.
What is globalization? Toyota cars are made by a Japanese corporation, but the chassis of the car are made in England, the engines in Wales, the tires in Japan, the wiring in China, the seatbelts in the Czech Republic, and the headlights in France. Like many goods that we're familiar with, these cars are manufactured in a number of different places in the world. This is an expression of globalization. In 1986, global trade reached a scope of approximately 2,000 billion US dollars, and 10 years later, it reached 5,200 billion US dollars. As a result of this 260% increase, foreign-made products that were rarely seen in countries around the world prior to globalization became a common sight. Globalization is much more than international trade, global chains, and cheap goods. Globalization is a process where countries around the world are becoming closer in a number of areas. It influences people, immigration, employment, ideas, and knowledge. 21% of Canadians were not born in Canada. 69% of Kuwaitis are foreigners, and factories of international companies are built in various places around the world, employing numerous workers. Many goods are manufactured and sold identically around the world. Globalization changes the face of society, is the source of demonstrations and revolutions, presents us with faraway cultures, and even allows us to pursue justice around the world. The main economic expression of globalization is international trade, and it brings knowledge within reach, enriches our knowledge, and expands it. World trade has grown at twice the rate of the global economy since 1960, partly as a result of globalization in the financial markets, payments, injections of capital, and cross-border investments. Global trade has caused the rise of many world powers in history. Marco Polo in 1306, Columbus in 1492, Bretton Woods in 1945, and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. In the long term, it is apparent that financial empires overcame military powers. In the late 20th century, global trade made China into the power that it is. With cheap manpower, China created an enormous export machine that many claim have harmed numerous industries around the world, such as the textile industry. The factors that drive globalization cannot be stopped.
Thank you for watching.